Okay, that looks like that's going. I'm going to start recording here and we'll get going. So welcome everybody. Good to see we've got another good crowd on with us today in our 6th class. I think we have 5 more to go. We set up 11 classes, and I'm so grateful for all of those who volunteered to be our instructors and teach us this summer, since we couldn't have our Master Gardener Conference. So welcome, and welcome Brenda Sanders. Brenda, some of you may know Brenda. She was the host of Oklahoma Gardening 23 years ago when I got hired. And so we've worked together, and then she got married, had kids, or has a child, and went to be a mom for a while, right?
Yeah.
And now that her son is all grown up, my gosh, grown up, and on his way to new and better things, she's come back to work for us. So we're excited to have Brenda working with our department again. So, all right, Brenda, I think we'll go ahead and just turn it over to you. And you should be able to share your screen. And like I say, we'll go about 45 minutes or rougher, give or take, whenever you get finished, and then address some questions.
Great.
And that'll be it. Thanks.
All right, thank you. And this will take me a little bit to get my screen set up here. Just a minute. Okay. Beginning.
Oh, and just a reminder for those, I see many of you have already put your county that you represent in the chat box. And if you want to, those that haven't done that yet, if you would like to do that so we know what county you're from, that would be greatly appreciated.
All right. Can you see that? Actually, you can just see part of it, I think. Are you guys doing okay on?
Not seeing anything yet.
Oh, wait. There we go.
Oh. There you go. Okay.
Okay. Are we good?
Yep.
Great. Let's see. Oh, it went away. Is it still there?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, yes, it's still there. You're good.
All right, great. This is hard. All right, well, my presentation today is water efficient plants. And again, my name is Brenda Sanders, and I've been working in the horticulture department again, and I've been helping out with the Think Water program. And that what we do is kind of do some water saving training currently for the city of Edmond. And so that's why I'm talking about water efficient plants today. And before we start going through a list of water efficient plants, I wanted to just say a few things. It's a good idea, and you all know, because you're master gardeners, to do a little bit of pre-planning before you just run out and start buying plants. Of course, we usually just see what we like and start getting them, and then a lot of times figure out what to do with them after we get them. But just to kind of review a little bit, it's a good idea to do your homework before you go out and buy plants. And really, by homework, if you're doing your whole landscape and you want to plan it to be more water efficient, then one of the first things that you can do is take stock of what you have, see where you're at, and then you can plan where to go. And so basically do a site analysis. And this can be, you can be very precise and do this to scale on a piece of graph paper, or you can just kind of sketch out something. But it's a good idea to do this. And even if you're just planting a new bed, it's a good idea to kind of do an analysis and see what's there and what's around it. And basically in a site analysis, you want to record your existing structures and features. Also record any existing plants that you have. Mark utility lines on the map, and even if you want to call Oki and have them mark those out for you, you can get them on the map where they are, so you know you're not planting trees or shrubs over a water line or something like that. And then also you want to identify the positive and the negative aspects. And these are things like, you know, can you see the neighbor's trash cans from your back patio? And even if you go inside your house and you have windows that you look out of, what do you see when you look out of them? Are there things that need screened or things like that? So you can identify all these things and write them down on your sheet of paper, and it'll help you as you choose your plants. And this is actually important for having a water efficient landscape. And things you want to pay attention to: sun exposure, you know, does it get morning sun, afternoon sun, all of those things that go into choosing plants, always important. Are wind, are there areas that you don't have any air circulation at all? Are there areas that are really windy that might need some kind of a screen there? The topography that you have, what you're dealing with, you know, do you have a hilly area, or is it, you know, not that bad? Temperature, are there warmer spots and cooler spots in your landscape? Water and drainage, of course. It's good to make note of those things, and also what soil type do you have. And your soil type will affect the water efficiency of your plants. You know, if you have your sandy soils, they're not going to hold water very long, while your clay soils will hold it for a long time, maybe too long. So anyway, you know, take stock of what you've got already. And then the other thing that you want to do is determine the end use. Are you at a stage where you need some big grassy areas for kids to play in, you know, pets to run, things like that? Or are you kind of phasing out of that? Do you want to have areas of relaxation like outdoor rooms or something like that? Are you wanting to put in different types of gardens, vegetable garden, perennial gardens, you know, is sun perennials, shade perennials, things like that? And then also, mentioned this a little bit before, do you have areas that need screening? And then also, what are your long-term plans? If you're thinking, I want to put a pool in 5 years down the road, don't make major plantings in that area because you're going to have to remove them. So again, these are things to take into consideration. And then from that site analysis, you can then move on and create a design plan. And again, this doesn't have to be very elaborate, or you can go all out, but you basically are kind of sketching in the things that you want. So you have a plan of the type of plants that you're going to need before you go out and start looking for them. And since and this is an extension presentation, we always have to mention soil. We're not going to talk about it for very long, but we know it's a good idea to get that soil sample, and then also think about things that you might need to amend the soil with. And organic matter, of course, is very, very helpful when you're trying to conserve water, because it will help sandy soils hold water, and then it will also help clay soils drain better. And so those things, you know, you want to do those before you go to plant your plants. And all of this pre-planting will help your plants be more water efficient if you pay attention to these things to begin with. So anyway, then there are some things when you go to select plants that you should take into consideration. And a couple of these are actually very important when we're talking about choosing water efficient plants. And so I'm going to address those two to begin with. And then there are also some design elements that are good to take into consideration when selecting plants that I'll go over after that. But the first thing of course, is to think about the water requirements that a plant has. And you do very well to choose plants, obviously, that are well adapted to Oklahoma's climate. You know, you might have a favorite plant, but it would prefer to live in Oregon. That may not be the best choice for a water efficient landscape. And the other thing that you want to do is you want to group plants with similar water requirements. So basically, just because you may be having a water efficient landscape, it doesn't mean that you have to have, you know, all cactus and succulents and rocks in your yard, because that actually won't work that well for our area. You can have areas that may take more water, but group plants together in those areas so that you're only watering a small area of your landscape more, as opposed to having them scattered out. Because what happens when you scatter those plants out in your landscape, then you end up overwatering some plants and underwatering others. And so anyway, it just does better to group them by their water requirements. And the other thing to remember is that newly planted plants will take more frequent watering than established plants. You know, they're new, their root ball is basically the size of the pot they were in, and they're going to dry out a lot faster. And they dry out a lot faster too because they're in potting soil, and the surrounding soil is a different texture. And so they're going to use up all the water out of that more porous soil that they're in until their roots have a chance to go out into the surrounding soil. And back into choosing plants that are well adapted to Oklahoma's climate, of course, choosing native plants is a great way to go. Because of course they are adapted. And that doesn't mean that they all have to be native, but that's a good kind of, hey, is this plant native to our state? It's a good key to know that it's probably going to do okay with whatever water we have available. The other thing that's really important to think about is the mature size of the plant. And a lot of times we kind of forget about that. And even people that do landscaping, people don't stay in their same home like they used to. They move around a lot more. And so a lot of times people want things planted and they want it to look like it's been there. And so they want everything to be close together when it's planted. And that's really not a good idea, and for several reasons. And my classic example of this is the blue Atlas cedar you see here on the left. It's a great plant for Oklahoma. It's a good substitute for the blue spruce. And, you know, people like it because it has that, you know, you're trying to recreate that mountainy look with the boulders and things like that. And it fits in very well. And also it's an evergreen. So it's, you know, it stays green year round. And it also has that neat blue color. And a lot of times we'll see it here on the left. You can see, we'll see it planted about like this. This is actually a sign, but it could easily be the side of the house, about 2 to 3 feet from the side of the house. Okay, this fits well here now. Okay, 15, 20 years down the road, you notice what happens is that it's had to be limbed up. It's been planted in too close. And so you don't get all of the nice, you just don't get to reap the benefits of this plant when you don't take into consideration the amount of space it's going to take. And over here on the right, this is actually the mature size of an Atlas cedar. And if you notice here in this picture, this is a vehicle. And so that gives you the idea of how big this tree will actually get. And the cool thing is, if you plant it where it has room to grow, either you or someone is going to be able to enjoy this plant at full size. And I'm going to show you here on our next slide, here's two examples. These are about probably 15, 16 years old. And again, on the left, we have an area where they didn't take mature size into consideration. And then on the right, we did, and this is our cedar out here. It's got a lot of room to grow. But the other thing is all the other plants are also able to reach their mature size. And here, everything's its mature size, but you can't see the house. So that's bad from a design standpoint, but it's also bad from a water efficiency standpoint, because all of these plants on the left they're all competing for the same water. And you're going to have to water a whole lot to keep this area going. Whereas on the right, everyone's got room to grow, and you can take advantage of a plant's water efficiency as it grows if you give it enough space to mature. So that's really important to take into consideration when you're wanting to plant and be water efficient. Some other things to take into consideration, and these are just design things, so I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, but color is, a lot of us plant based on color, and so there are some different design schemes that you can use, analogous, where the colors are right next to each other on the color wheel. You could also use complementary colors. This is a real popular one in the spring with the spring flowering bulbs. And complementary is basically colors that are directly across from each other on the color wheel. And they really make each other pop when you use complementary colors. And then another color scheme that's fun to use is a monochromatic color scheme. And a lot of times people will do this with the annuals that they plant, which is one of the ways that we bring extra color into the landscape. And so, choosing one general hue on the color wheel to be, our theme. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be the bloom. In here we've got red blooms, and then we have red leaves or red stem color and things like that. So all of those kind of work together to give that, to contribute to the color scheme. Another thing to think about is the form of the plant. Is it small and rounded, or is it tall and narrow? And so these are things that you don't want every plant in your landscape to be the same form. We've seen the green meatballs where all the plants in the landscape are a rounded, low-growing shrub, and that gets kind of boring to look at. So if you can mix those things up, that's good to do. And here is kind of two trees that are about the same size, but you can see how a difference in form you can actually see from a distance, whereas we've got on the left more of a weeping form, whereas on the right it's more of an upright form. But we've also got a difference in texture, because we have a much smaller leaf on the left and then a larger leaf on the right. And you can see where you can get a lot of interest from a distance using differences in both form and texture. And then basically texture is, how soft does it look? And you can see here basically the difference between something that looks very soft and then something that's very coarse. And you get quite a difference from a distance when you use texture. Then one of the other things to think about is the season of interest. And it's important to kind of have things that basically show off in different seasons, so that you don't have a landscape that just looks fantastic for 2 weeks in the spring and then it's done. And so if you can stagger when when your plants show off, you'll have a much more interesting and more enjoyable year-round landscape. So now that we've gone through those beginning things to think about, we'll look at a few plants And we're going to focus on basically full sun plants today, and go through some trees, shrubs, some perennials, and then some annuals, and kind of look at, what makes them great, and hopefully you'll find a few that you would like to use. Of course, in Oklahoma, redbud is a great choice, and especially the Oklahoma cultivar of redbud is good. And the neat thing about it is it has that great spring show, but then it's also a good small tree. And especially in basically urban, I would say urban or small town, just if you live in town, you probably need to think about smaller trees unless you have a lot of, if you have a very large lot. A lot of us don't. And we need to kind of think towards smaller trees so that when they get to their mature size, they're still going to have room to live there. And so redbud's good because it only gets about 20 to 30 feet tall and about that wide. And again, it's got the pink to purple blooms, and its main time of interest is in the spring. But even through the summer, because of its really larger, heart-shaped, shiny leaves, it's really a nice tree through the summer. And if you get forest pansy redbud, then it has the purple leaves through the summer, so that gives it some summer interest too. One of my favorites is desert willow. I love this tree. I don't think we plant it as much as we should. And it's really neat because it's a willow that likes dry. And so it's also native, and it makes a nice screen. It's not more kind of it's more of a see-through, like a willow screen. It's not, a solid screen, but it's a good tree for our area, and it has this great pink flower on it in the kind of, I would say, late spring to early summer. It gets 20 to 30 feet tall and about 15 to 25 feet wide, and it really doesn't like overwatering. So once you've got it established, don't plant it somewhere where it's going to, in a low spot that might hold water, because it doesn't like that very much. And again, late spring to early summer is when it really likes to show off with the flowers. The maple, which we all, for fall color is hard to beat, but in Oklahoma, it's hard to get a maple to make it through the summer without burning up. And that's the cool thing about the Caddo sugar maple, is that it's native to our area and it is very drought tolerant. It's a larger tree. It's going to get 50 to 60 feet tall and 20 to 35 feet wide. So it's going to need a lot of room. It's a slower grower, but it's going to need space. And the other thing about it is it can be hard to find. You have to go to some of the specialty nurseries to be able to find this, but it's worth the hunt if you can find it. And again, its time to show off is really in the fall. It has gorgeous color. The Shantung is another maple that does well here, and it's smaller. It's good for urban areas, and it basically only gets about 20 feet tall and maybe 25 feet wide. But it makes a really good smaller tree. And the new leaves, when they come out, have kind of a purplish color to them. And because of this, it gives it pretty much some interest year round, just because you have the seeds on it, and then you have the leaves, and again, it's a good urban tree. So if you need a tree that doesn't get too big, it's great. Now, on the larger size, the Kentucky coffee tree is really, really a great tree if you have the space for it. It has kind of a ferny look to it, And it is native. It gets huge. You can see here 60 to 75 feet tall eventually. And the female trees, this is really cool. The female trees produce pods. Now this can be good or bad. You can get a sterile variety that doesn't produce the pods. The pods are neat, but if you're planting it somewhere where it's going to be over a driveway or a sidewalk, you don't want this because one, they're messy, and two, the seeds in them are actually really round and hard and pretty much like marbles. So it can get to be kind of a problem if it's a high traffic area, because when the pods drop and then the seeds shell out of them, it can get kind of slick. And it really is, it has good year-round interest, again, because of the lacy leaves. It has a pretty bloom on it in the spring, and the pods are cool through the winter. And then the tree itself just has a neat, structure, even when it doesn't have leaves. So it's basically got some year-round interest to it. And then, of course, the Atlas cedar is, like I said before, a good substitute for blue spruce. It's 40 to 60 feet tall and about 40 feet wide. And you just want to make sure to give it room so that you can enjoy it when it gets large, because it is gorgeous once it's full size. And because it's an evergreen, it's got some year-round interest to it. And now we're going to take a look at a few of the shrubs that are good for water savings in the landscape. And lead plant is a native shrub, and it's actually very drought tolerant. It's really pretty. It gets maybe 2 to 3 feet tall and about that wide. And it kind of can end up looking a little bit leggy. So you want to cut it back occasionally to keep it full, but it has this nice purple bloom on it and kind of the silvery, leafy, kind of ferny foliage on it. And it's just a really neat shrub for our area. And again, it's native, and it's kind of neat if you're trying to create a meadow type look, because it will grow in that type of environment, but it also looks good with other grasses and some of those plants. And it's basically time to show off is in the summer with the bloom. And the bloom is spirea. It's a caryopteris. It's not like the other spireas that we plant. It's a different genus, but it's neat because it attracts bees and hummingbirds. And also it's got the blue flower, which is a little bit harder to find, things that have more of the blue flower as opposed to the purplish blue flower. It can get about 2 to 2.5 feet tall and 3 feet wide. And it'll basically do several flushes of these blue flowers pretty much all summer long. And that's what gives it its show, is basically throughout the summer. And one of my favorites is the vitex or chaste tree. And this is an awesome shrub. It is very attractive to bees and other pollinators. Butterflies love it. I have one in my yard, and we actually had a hive of bees come, and they were on the move, and they came and took up residence in here, and we had to have a beekeeper come, and he was happy to get them because he wanted some new bees. But the bumblebees love this, the honeybees love it, so it's a great bee plant. And also it will bloom pretty much from midsummer on. It has at least 2, if not 3 flushes of bloom. It is a huge shrub. It gets at least 10 feet tall, probably 10 to 12 feet tall, and it just gets wider and wider. It's a trunked shrub. And what you can do with it is you can actually limb it up so that it makes a small tree. And there are several of these shrubs that I'm going to talk about that are good candidates for this. And that's a good choice for areas where, say, you've got power lines overhead. You may think about putting a larger shrub under them instead of a small tree, because sometimes the small trees just outgrow their, they still get too tall, and the power company has to come through and start cutting limbs out. And well, something like this is a good alternative to that, because you can make it look like a small tree. But you can also just cut it off at the ground and let it be a bushy shrub every year, if you're trying to keep it a little bit shorter. And again, it's time to really show off is throughout the summer. It does not bloom early, but it will bloom late. But the first freeze we get, it's done, and all the leaves they just turn kind of a grayish, they crumble. So it does not like any cold weather at all. But it sure is gorgeous through the summer. So here we go. This is another shrub that does very well, and you can even see here it's actually planted beneath some power lines, but the smoke tree. And the flowers are really cool because they look like smoke, and they're kind of a pinkish color, mauvish pink color, and it gets about 10 feet tall, and it's another one that's multi-trunked, so you can basically decide how wide you want it to be and then take off any extra trunks that come up. And you can actually get this with a green leaf. It has a round leaf on it, but you can also get them where they have red leaves through the summer. And so that gives it a longer season of interest when you get the one with the purple leaves on it, I guess. But it also, again, all of these shrubs, once they're established, don't take very much supplemental, if any, supplemental water. This one is actually planted in one of those hot spots between a sidewalk and a driveway, and it pretty much thrives in that area. Moving from larger shrubs to smaller shrubs, the William Penn Barbary is actually good because it is low growing, and a lot of times we end up planting shrubs in an area and we would like them to stay below 3 feet tall, and guess what? William Penn will do that. And it gets wider, it basically gets wider than it does tall. And so that makes it a nice low hedge that you don't have to keep trimming all the time to keep it low. And that makes it good. It also has this great shiny leaf on it, and it blooms in the summer. It has a yellow bloom on it. So it's a good, I don't think we use this shrub as much as we maybe should in our landscape. Another one is fragrant sumac, and it's native, and there are dwarf selections that are available. The actual sumac, this isn't like the other sumac that you see. This is fragrant sumac, which is a little shorter than what we see along the roadside most of the time in the fall. It gets 5 feet tall and about 4 feet wide. And it's really good for if you have a slope that needs stabilized, it's a good one to plant on your slope, because it will help keep, one, it doesn't take a whole lot of care, and two, it also helps keep that soil from eroding. And so it's really good for that. And it basically has some year-round interest to it. It has great fall color, looks neat in the space, just a good shrub to have as a background planting for things. because it really shows off other things and it takes little to no care, which is good. Glossy abelia is a neat flowering shrub that pretty much flowers repeatedly throughout the summer, and it attracts pollinators and hummingbirds, and so that makes it a good plant to have in the landscape. Now there are so many different varieties, cultivars of glossy abelia that you can get, and many of them are dwarf. If you get the standard glossy abelia, it can get 6 feet tall and wide, but you can choose your size. And also there are several cultivars that have various leaf color. And so you can get some that have maybe some yellow variegation or some bronze variegation in them. So you can really add a lot of interest through the leaves of the abelia, in addition to just having it flower. And it's also what we call a semi-evergreen, in that some years it will keep its leaves throughout the winter, but then there are also some years that it will lose its leaves if it gets really cold, but that's okay. It's not dead. It's going to re-leaf in the spring, and it will basically make it, and you can actually cut it back quite heavily and it will regrow from the root if you need to. And so it's just a good kind of a workhorse shrub for the garden. And again, it's available in so many different sizes. You can choose what you need for your area. And then moving to a little bit back to a little bit larger, the southern wax myrtle is a really good shrub. And it's neat because it has kind of an olive green foliage to it. You can see here when it's backed by other plants that just have green foliage that it really does have a different tint to it. And it gets about 15 feet tall. And again, another multi-trunked shrub that can be limbed up to make a small tree. And it pretty much has year-round interest to it, which is again nice to have as a background. And now we're going to take a look at some of the perennials that do well with little water. And Coreopsis is, again, a native perennial, and there are several different varieties of Coreopsis available, and they vary in how tall they get, but generally speaking, 1.5 feet maybe, and they of course will spread out and get wider. But there are some that stay smaller than this, so you just have to read and see. And it is one that blooms earlier in the summer. So after we get done with all of our spring blooming plants, between basically late spring to early summer, that's when Coreopsis is going to bloom. Yarrow is another native plant that does very well here and can get about 18 inches tall and at least 36 inches wide. My mom has one that got overwatered this spring, and it's probably about 2 feet tall, and it basically got a little too tall and fell over. So if you're overwatering or over fertilizing this one, it may tend to get a little bit leggy on you. And the nice thing about it is there's a lot of different colors to choose from. And the foliage can either be green or a grayish color. And it's kind of nice to have a yarrow because this is something that has a ferny look to it. It has that texture that can take full sun and low water situations. So it's something that gives you that ferny feel out in an area where ferns won't grow. And again, most of its bloom is through the summer. If you deadhead it, you'll get continuous flushes of bloom, which is nice. The butterfly weeds are great to add to your perennial landscape. They're native and they will attract the butterflies. And it also has very interesting seed pods on them, and they'll bloom through the summer. And basically this clump will slowly get larger in your landscape. And another one of the butterfly weeds, and I really like this because it's native. It's got an interesting flower. It's kind of a greenish flower, and they'll get at least 30 inches tall and about 24 inches wide. But the cool thing is it is the host plant for monarch butterflies. And so if you have these in your garden, you will be feeding monarch larvae, and so you'll probably have monarchs in your garden because you've got their host plant. And so that's one great reason to have it. And the other thing is it's native, and so it's not going to take a lot of water, and it does bloom pretty much through the middle of the summer. Standing cypress is another native that gets quite tall. It can get up to 5 feet tall and be quite wide too. Has the bright red flower, and it's attractive to bees, butterflies, birds, and especially hummingbirds like this flower. And its season of interest is in the summer. And then ironweed is another perennial that is native, does very well here, and it needs a little bit more room. And again, attracts butterflies and other pollinators, and really shows off through the summer. And then Russian sage is one of my favorites again, because it is attractive to bees and pretty much any other pollinator that's around likes Russian sage. And so once it starts blooming, I think it's a good one to have close to your vegetable garden because it attracts so many pollinators. And it's also good for the back of the border because it gets a little bit tall and it will just continue to get larger and larger. Now you can dig it up and divide it and keep it under control that way. But if you want to let it go, put it at the back of the border and then forget about it, and it'll look gorgeous basically through the summer until it freezes. And then goldenrod, it's one of my favorites because it blooms in basically the late part of the summer when not much else is blooming. And the reason that I love it so much is because it takes little to no care and it's blooming when nothing else is. And I always want to remind people that it is not ragweed because it blooms at the same time as ragweed, but you can't see the flowers on ragweed as you're driving down the road. You can't see them, but you see all this goldenrod on the side of the road blooming, and you think that's what's causing your allergies, but it's not. So it's a wonderful garden plant because it blooms when not much else is blooming in the late summer and through the early fall. And then blue false indigo, it's available in several different colors besides blue. This is more of kind of a mauve color, also available in the yellow and green. And it gets about 36 inches tall and 48 inches wide. And it works well in the back of flower borders because it basically has this gorgeous flush of blooms in the spring, but then it looks more like a pea plant. It basically has that look to it, and it's a nice mound of rounded foliage throughout the summer. And then it gets some great seed pods on it throughout the winter months. So it's really got some year-round interest to it, but you want to plant it and leave it because it doesn't like to be moved. And then Rattlesnake Master is kind of a neat plant. It's another native that gets larger, and it looks like a yucca really. And you're going to want to give it some room and let it spread out. But if you do that, then it also again has excuse me, when the seed pods are dry, it has some really great interest even throughout the winter. And then finally, red yucca is of course a wonderful plant to have in a water saving landscape because it likes hot and dry places. It's also attractive to hummingbirds, which is really cool. And it will get, it's a little smaller than a regular yucca, but it still gets, you know, about 4 feet tall and about 3 feet wide. And the neat thing about it too is that, yes, it's heat and drought tolerant, but it's, even though it is, the foliage on it is actually very, very hard. It will poke you, you know, you have to be careful, but from it, it doesn't look as coarse as a yucca does, because the, you know, it has a little bit of a weeping look to it. And so it's a nice sturdy plant that can still give you a little bit of a soft look. So, and again, it basically has year-round interest to it. And now we'll take a look at a few annuals. I think I've got a couple minutes here. I'm going to run out of time, but one of the annuals that's neat to plant if you're trying to create a meadow is Indian paintbrush, and you plant it from seed. It is native, and it gets about a foot tall, and then it, you know, basically will spread out, and it self-sows, and it's good for naturalizing. And if you have an area where you want to establish a meadow, include the Indian paintbrush, because it's just gorgeous in the early spring. And then Cosmos is a good one to plant in our area. It's native and basically can get up to 2 feet tall. And be careful not to over fertilize it or over water it, because if you do that, it gets too tall and it falls over. So it really likes to be run on the lean side with both of these. Now firebush is not native, but it's a, whoops, I'm finding my other stuff. It's a more of a tropical plant that we plant as an annual here, and it attracts hummingbirds and butterflies. And it can be a pretty big mound, about 30 inches tall, but they actually have a dwarf firebush now that only gets about 18 inches tall. And the leaves turn red in the fall, so you get a little bit of interest even into the fall with it. And one of my favorites for just a workhorse through the summer that will keep blooming even when it gets hot is Lantana. Because, and the other thing, if you've ever planted it, you know, you've got butterflies all over the place if you have Lantana. Most of them get about 2 feet tall and then about 3 feet wide. They do have some dwarf forms now that stay maybe at 12 inches. And it loves the heat. And there's different colors that are available that you can use in your landscape. And I wanted to mention that all these annuals are a good way to, when you're trying to plant your trees and your shrubs and your perennials, where they're going to have room to grow, when you first plant them, fill in between in those spaces with annuals, and then so that your landscape will look full to begin with. And then as things start to grow and you go year by year, you plant less annuals as those other plants grow into maturity. So I wanted to mention that this is how you kind of fill in when you leave everything else room to grow. And Mexican bush sage is a really good one to fill in with because it gets so large. And it attracts, again, hummingbirds, butterflies, and bees. It can get at least 3, if not 4 feet tall. And sometimes it can overwinter. If we have a very mild winter, then it'll overwinter. And so with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and close up. Oh, I did want to show you here. I'm going to go on through. We'll go through yellow bells very quickly, which is another tropical that works great. And then finally, Silver Falls Dichondra is a good ground cover, also great for planting in pots. And that silver color really helps show everything else off, which makes it really nice. And it, you know, it's a spreader. It only gets 2 to 4 inches tall. And I wanted to show you some of the resources. The plants that I talked about today are in the Water Efficient Landscapes for Oklahoma bulletin that you can get from the Extension office. You can also see it online if you don't want to get the book. Also, the Oklahoma Proven is another good place to look on the website, and also in the book that they put out. But there's also a couple of drought tolerant plant databases. The city of Edmond has one on their water resources page. And then also the city of Oklahoma City has one on their water resources page. And you can basically put in what you want, what qualities you want, and then bring up some of the water efficient plants that are available that do well in those areas. And then I also wanted to point out the Think Water webpage that's on the Horticulture Department site, and it's still being added to, but there are some other water saving resources there. And I want to thank you for listening to the talk today, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. See if I can get rid of my share screen here. So,
all right,
there
thanks,
we go.
Brenda.
Yes.
Okay, anybody have any questions? You can put it in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask away.
Speak up. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Brenda. We go to Will Rogers Gardens a lot, and
Yes.
They have such a wide variety of flowers of all colors, and their bloom, it seems like year round. But I've appreciated your presentation because we don't know the names of 75% of those plants out there. So very helpful. Thank you.
Good.
Mickey asked, my red yucca only blooms every other year. Is that normal? Not that I know of.
No.
We have several really nice planting of red yuccas on campus, and they're in full bloom every summer, both the yellow flowering type as well as the red. I have one in my front yard that just bloomed for the first time this year, and it's been there for several years. I'm not even sure how it got there. I just planted it.
That's funny.
But problem is it's right up against the front of the house. The house faces southwest, southwest, and it really doesn't get a whole lot of sun until late in the afternoon, and then throughout the rest of the afternoon. So it hasn't really grown significantly, and like I said, this is the first time I've gotten any blooms on it. So it might be, I don't know how much sun the plants are getting, but I don't know if that has something to do with it blooming every other year. How old is it, Mickey? How long have you had it? Yeah, I'm not really sure what to tell you, Mickey.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't heard of that. And it's not shaded at all.
No, it sounds like it's getting lots of sun. Patrick asked, is Asclepias viridis easier to grow from seed or from plants purchased from nurseries? Oh, I don't know. It seems like it would actually, I believe it grows fairly easily from seed.
I would think. I think that you'll end up with it being more drought tolerant if you would grow it from seed.
Yeah, and some of the Asclepias have a difficult time transplanting as plants.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's one of them that does that as well. How can I encourage more blooms on my red yucca? It's under an overhang on house, south facing, gets at least 6 hours of sun. Do I need to water it more? No, probably not. I have 2 stalks of flowers on large foliage plant. I don't know. That's another good question. Again, might have something, and you know, being up against a porch, and maybe that's part of my problem too, is that because it's right up against the patio, the concrete patio or porch on our house, maybe it stays too moist at times, because maybe some of that moisture stays trapped underneath that concrete. I don't know, I'm just guessing. It's not the greatest soil. It's not really well drained. You know, the top few inches drains well, and then it's really heavy clay underneath in my yard. So I don't know. Betty, do false indigos need to be watered some during the summer to keep the foliage from dying? No.
And I'm wondering, sometimes they get a little tiny caterpillar that gets on the foliage, and it'll start turning crispy looking. So you might check that to see if it's an insect that's doing that on the false indigos. But I would say, you know, once it's established, you know, unless we're having a drought, I think it can get along with whatever rain we get.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Are blanket flowers drought tolerant? Yes, for the most part. Now, some of the hybrids that they're out there may be a little bit wimpier, but I mean, they're native to Oklahoma, especially western Oklahoma. So once they get established, now there are annuals and perennial types. So just realize that. But once they get established, generally they're pretty tough. Might do better if there's some supplemental irrigation during the driest part of the summer. But
the Turk's cap should be blooming.
yeah, it usually blooms late in the summer and fall is when it blooms. So that means it would be blooming on this year's wood or this year's growth. So if you cut it back too late, you know, this spring, you might have removed the flower buds that were developing for the summer. But if you cut it back really early and this is all new growth and it's still not flowering, I don't know, because it'll take a great deal of shade and still bloom really well, even in shade.
Let's see. Looks like there's one, David, here that says, where can we find the recording?
It's on our Facebook Live webpage, and I can share that link here real quick if I can find it. And then I will be sending out, I've had some family issues going on the last week or two with my, and so I haven't gotten out all of the recordings from the last couple of classes, but I'll get those out to your county extension educator, and they can share that with you. Let me see if I'll go ahead and put the if I can find it, my Extension Master Gardener YouTube link in the chat box as well. So you'll be able to find it there on that link.
So let's see, Roberta said, do you know of any night blooming flowers except for Datura? And thanks, Roberta. I have to think about that.
I can't think of anything right off the top of my head.
Now, I'm trying to
I know there
remember.
are some, I just can't think of what they are.
Yeah.
I'd have to do a little research on that one.
Yeah. And then I had, oh, really? Nocturnal blooming daylilies. I have to look that one up. And there's some right now, it's not coming to mind, but
There's night blooming jasmine. There's night blooming cereus.
yeah.
Night blooming henna. That's interesting too. So you might just have to do a little Google search and see what you can find.
Yeah. Very good.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions for Brenda?
Night blooming daylilies is an oxymoron.
That's true.
Very true. I had someone ask about how do you get Indian paintbrush to grow, and I would recommend looking at the ODOT site and their wildflower planting. They have a wildflower planting guide, and they do a very good job of planting Indian
Yes.
paintbrush. So, and then another place to look is the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. They have a lot of good information on how to plant and get wildflowers to grow. So that might be a good place to look for that.
All right. Thank you.
So.
Well, just a reminder, next week, the 21st, we'll have Ching Luo, one of our landscape architects in the department, and she'll be talking about identifying weather-resistant hardscape materials for outdoor planters and elements. She's really good, a really good designer, a landscape architect, and she's really into or enjoys addressing recycling and reusing materials, especially in the landscape. So it'll be interesting to see what she has to tell us next week. So, all right, thanks everybody. I guess we will see you next week. Thanks. Thanks, Brenda.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.